The massive alien space station hung in the black void like a metal city floating among the stars. Captain Lisa Monroe stood at the small window of her transport ship and watched the Corvan battle station grow larger as they approached. The thing was huge, bigger than any human-built structure she had ever seen. It looked like someone had taken a dozen warships and welded them together into one giant fortress. Lisa turned away from the window and checked her uniform one more time. Everything had to be perfect today. The peace talks with the Corvan Empire were the most important negotiations humanity had attempted in decades. If they went well, 3 human colony worlds would stay safe. If they went badly, those worlds might be destroyed. "How are you feeling about this, Captain?" asked the man sitting across from her. Staff Sergeant Jake Sullivan was her bodyguard and security chief. He was not a large man by human standards, standing just under 6 feet tall with brown hair and calm blue eyes. He wore a simple black suit instead of his military uniform, trying to look more like a diplomat than a soldier. "Nervous," Lisa admitted. "The Corvans have never agreed to real peace talks before. They prefer to just take what they want by force." Jake nodded and adjusted his tie. "Intelligence says their leader, Warlord Thrak, only respects strength. He thinks humans are too weak to be worth talking to as equals." "Well, hopefully we can change his mind without anyone getting hurt," Lisa said. Their transport ship shuddered slightly as it passed through the station's energy shield. Through the speakers came a harsh, guttural voice speaking broken English. "Human ship, you will dock at Bay 7. You will bring no weapons. You will show proper respect to Warlord Thrak the Destroyer." Lisa and Jake exchanged glances. The Corvan who spoke sounded like he was giving orders rather than showing basic courtesy to visiting diplomats. This was not a good start. 20 minutes later, they walked through the airlock into the Corvan station. The first thing that hit them was the smell, a mixture of metal, oil, and something organic that made Lisa's nose wrinkle. The second thing was the size of everything. The corridors were built for beings much larger than humans. The doorways were 12 feet tall, and the ceiling disappeared into shadows above them. 2 Corvan warriors waited to escort them. Lisa had seen pictures of the alien race, but seeing them in person was still shocking. Each one stood nearly 8 feet tall and looked like they were wearing natural armor. Their skin was dark gray and covered in chitinous plates that looked harder than steel. They had 4 arms instead of 2, and each arm was thick with muscle. Their faces were angular and harsh, with small black eyes that seemed to look at the humans with contempt. "Follow," one of them growled in English. His voice sounded like rocks grinding together. They walked through corridor after corridor, passing dozens of other Corvans. Every single one stopped to stare at the 2 humans. Lisa heard them talking in their own language, and while she could not understand the words, the tone was clear. They were laughing at her and Jake. Some pointed with 2 or 3 of their arms. Others made gestures that were probably insults. "They really do think we're pathetic," Jake said quietly. "Stay calm," Lisa whispered back. "Remember, we're here to make peace, not to prove anything." The great hall where the negotiations would take place was enormous. The ceiling stretched up at least 50 feet, and the room could have held 1,000 people easily. At the far end sat Warlord Thrak on a throne made of black metal. He was the largest Corvan Lisa had ever seen, standing what looked like 9 feet tall even while sitting down. Scars covered his armor-like skin, and his 4 arms were crossed in a pose that radiated authority and menace. Around the throne stood dozens of other Corvan nobles and warriors. They all turned to watch as the 2 small humans walked across the vast floor toward their leader. The sound of Lisa's heels clicking on the metal floor echoed loudly in the silence. When they reached the throne, Lisa stopped and gave a formal diplomatic bow. "Warlord Thrak, I am Captain Lisa Monroe of the Human Colonial Federation. I come seeking peace between our peoples." Thrak leaned forward and studied her with his small black eyes. When he spoke, his voice boomed across the hall. "So, the soft pink weaklings finally send someone to beg for mercy. Tell me, little human, why should the mighty Corvan Empire waste time talking to creatures as frail as you?" The insult was clear, and Lisa felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she kept her voice steady and professional. Because both our peoples have much to gain from peace and much to lose from continued conflict. Thrak laughed, a harsh sound like metal scraping against stone. The laugh was picked up by the other Corvins in the hall until the entire room echoed with their mockery. Conflict? Thrak said. What conflict? We take what we want from you, and you run away. That is not conflict. That is simply the strong claiming what belongs to them. One of the Corvans standing near the throne stepped forward. He was younger than Thrak, but still massive, with fewer scars on his natural armor. Father, he said in English, clearly wanting the humans to understand. Why do we even speak to these insects? Look at them. This tiny female claims to represent an entire species, and this male beside her is supposed to be her protector. The young Corvan was looking directly at Jake as he spoke. Tell me, small human, are you truly their greatest warrior? You barely reach my chest, and you have only 2 arms. Our children are stronger than you. Jake said nothing, but Lisa noticed. His posture changed slightly. His hands moved to his sides and his weight shifted to the balls of his feet. It was a subtle change, but she had worked with him long enough to recognize when he was preparing for trouble. Thrak gestured toward his son with one of his massive arms. This is my eldest, Commander Vex. He speaks the truth. How can we negotiate with beings so weak they send children to represent them? We are not as weak as we appear, Lisa said carefully. No? Vex stepped closer, looming over both humans. Prove it. Your protector looks like he would break if I simply squeezed him with one hand. The tension in the room grew thick. Lisa could feel dozens of alien eyes watching them, waiting to see how the humans would respond to the obvious challenge. She knew that showing fear now would end any chance of successful negotiations. But she also knew that accepting Vex's challenge could end in disaster. Jake finally spoke, his voice calm and quiet. I'm here to protect Captain Monroe during diplomatic talks, not to provide entertainment. Vex laughed and looked around at the other Corvins. See how the weak creature tries to avoid showing his true nature? He knows he cannot match even the weakest Corvin warrior. The young alien deliberately reached out with one of his 4 hands and knocked over the glass of water that had been placed on the small table beside Lisa. The liquid splashed across her shoes and the floor. Oops, Vex said with a cruel smile. How clumsy of me. Jake took 1 step forward. The single step Jake took forward was controlled and precise, but every Corvin in the Great Hall saw it. The massive aliens shifted their positions, some moving closer to get a better view of what they expected to be a very brief and entertaining fight. Commander Vex smiled wider, showing teeth that looked designed for tearing meat. Did the little human just threaten me? Vex asked loudly, making sure everyone in the hall could hear him. How amusing. I have not been challenged by prey before. Warlord Thrak held up one of his 4 hands, and the murmuring that had started among his warriors stopped immediately. The silence that followed was heavy and dangerous. Commander Vex, the warlord said slowly, you seem to have upset our guests. I apologize, Father, Vex replied, but his tone made it clear he was not sorry at all. I did not realize the humans were so sensitive about spilled water. Perhaps they are even weaker than we thought. Captain Lisa Monroe felt her heart racing, but she kept her expression neutral. She had been in difficult diplomatic situations before, but never one where the stakes were this high. 3 human colony worlds depended on these negotiations succeeding. She could not let personal insults derail the peace process, no matter how degrading they became. There is no need for apologies, she said diplomatically. Accidents happen. Perhaps we could return to discussing the proposed treaty terms. Treaty terms? Thrak laughed again, and the sound echoed off the metal walls. Little human, you still do not understand your position. You are here to surrender, not to negotiate. The Corvin Empire has claimed the 3 star systems your people occupy. You will withdraw from them immediately, or we will remove you by force. Lisa felt her stomach drop. This was far worse than their intelligence reports had suggested. The Corvins were not interested in any kind of fair agreement. They wanted complete submission. Warlord Thrak, those colonies have been inhabited by humans for over 20 years. Millions of people call those worlds home. Then they should have chosen their homes more wisely, Vex interjected. The strong take what they need from the weak. This is the way of the universe. Actually, Jake said quietly, that's not how it works at all. Every eye in the hall turned to the human bodyguard. He stood calmly beside Captain Monroe, his hands at his sides, looking completely relaxed despite being surrounded by dozens of alien warriors who could tear him apart. Vex turned to face him fully, all four of his massive arms spreading wide in what was clearly a threat display. "Excuse me?" Vex growled. "Did the tiny soldier just contradict me?" "I said that's not how the universe works," Jake repeated, his voice still quiet and conversational. "The strong don't always win. Sometimes intelligence beats strength. Sometimes speed beats size. Sometimes the weak turn out to be stronger than they look." Vex took 2 steps closer to Jake, close enough that his shadow fell over the human. "Are you suggesting that you are stronger than you look, little man?" "I'm suggesting that appearances can be deceiving." The tension in the hall ratcheted up another notch. Lisa could see that several Corvin warriors had moved to better positions around the room, clearly expecting violence to break out at any moment. She wanted to tell Jake to back down, to apologize and defuse the situation, but she also knew that showing weakness now might make things even worse. Warlord Thrak leaned forward on his throne, studying the interaction between his son and the human with obvious interest. "You speak boldly for such a small creature," he rumbled, "but words are wind. Actions show truth." Vex flexed all 4 of his arms, and the muscles rippled under his natural armor plating. "Father, perhaps we should demonstrate to these humans exactly how outmatched they are." A traditional Corvin challenge would settle this matter quickly. The other Corvins in the hall began making excited noises in their own language. Lisa did not need a translation to understand that they liked this idea very much. She stepped forward, slightly, trying to position herself between Jake and the increasingly aggressive aliens. "That won't be necessary," she said firmly. "We came here for diplomatic talks, not for combat." "But you see, Captain," Thrak said, rising from his throne, "among my people, strength and diplomacy are the same thing. How can we negotiate with beings who cannot defend themselves? How do we know your promises have any value if you lack the power to enforce them?" The warlord gestured toward his son with 2 of his arms. "Commander Vex is one of our finest young warriors. He has defeated opponents twice his size in single combat. If your protector can survive against him for just 1 minute, we will consider that perhaps humans deserve to be treated as equals rather than as prey. And if he loses?" Lisa asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. Thrak's smile was not pleasant. "Then you will accept our terms without further discussion. Your people will abandon the 3 contested star systems within 30 standard days, and the Corvin Empire will take possession of all human infrastructure and resources left behind." Lisa looked at Jake, trying to read his expression. The former Marine was studying Commander Vex carefully, taking in every detail of the alien's size, reach, and apparent fighting ability. The Corvan was at least 2 feet taller than Jake and probably outweighed him by 200 pounds. His 4 arms gave him a massive advantage in any close combat situation, and his natural armor would protect him from most attacks. "This is insane," Lisa whispered to Jake. "You don't have to do this." "Actually, I think I do," Jake replied quietly. "Look around the room, Captain. These people don't respect diplomacy. They respect strength. If I back down now, they'll never take us seriously." Vex had been listening to their quiet conversation, and he laughed mockingly. "The tiny human is afraid." "This is as I expected. Your entire species hides behind technology because you are too weak to fight with your own hands. 1 minute?" Jake asked, looking directly at Warlord Thrak. 1 minute, the Warlord confirmed. "If you can remain standing and conscious for 60 seconds against my son, we will negotiate your treaty in good faith." Jake nodded once, then began removing his suit jacket. "I accept your challenge." The great hall erupted in noise as the Corvans expressed their excitement and anticipation. Many of them were clearly making bets on how quickly their champion would destroy the small human. Vex began stripping off his ceremonial armor, revealing the full extent of his natural plating and impressive musculature. Lisa felt sick to her stomach as she watched the preparations. Jake was a skilled fighter, she knew that, but this seemed like suicide. The size difference alone was overwhelming, and Vex had been trained for combat since birth. She wanted to call off the challenge, to find some other way to handle the situation. But she also knew it was too late for that. Jake folded his jacket neatly and handed it to her, then loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves. His movements were calm and methodical, showing no sign of the fear that Lisa was feeling. When he was ready, he walked to the center of the great hall where a circle had been cleared for the combat. Vex followed, and the size difference was even more apparent now. The Corvan towered over Jake like an adult standing next to a child. The alien prince began stretching his forearms and flexing his muscles, putting on a show for his people. The assembled warriors cheered and chanted his name in their harsh language. "Any last words, little human?" Vex asked Mockingly. Jake looked up at his opponent and smiled slightly. "Just one question. In your culture, what happens to warriors who underestimate their enemies?" Commander Vex did not answer Jake's question about underestimating enemies. Instead, he threw back his head and released a war cry that shook the metal walls of the great hall. The sound was deafening, a roar of fury and bloodlust that had probably terrified countless opponents in the past. The assembled Corvan warriors responded with their own battle cries, creating a wall of noise that made Captain Lisa Monroe cover her ears. Jake Sullivan stood perfectly still in the center of the combat circle, watching his opponent with calm blue eyes. He did not flinch at the noise or step backward from the display of aggression. His breathing remained steady and controlled, and his hands stayed relaxed at his sides. To the watching Corvans, he looked like a man who had already accepted death. Warlord. Thrak raised one of his massive arms, and the hall fell silent. "The challenge begins now," he announced. "Commander Vex will face the human in single combat. The human must remain standing and conscious for 1 full minute to achieve victory." Vex crouched slightly, spreading his forearms wide like a spider, preparing to catch prey. His black eyes were fixed on Jake with predatory focus. The young Corvan had fought dozens of opponents in his life, and he had never lost a single combat. This tiny human would be his easiest victory yet. "I will try to make this quick, little man," Vex said with mock sympathy. "I do not enjoy causing unnecessary suffering." Jake said nothing in response. He simply shifted his weight slightly, moving from a casual standing position into something that looked almost the same, but was actually a combat stance perfected over years of training. The change was so subtle that most of the watching Corvans did not even notice it, but Vex noticed. For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across his angular features. Something about the human's posture had changed, though he could not quite identify what. The small man no longer looked like easy prey. He looked like something else entirely. Then the moment passed, and Vex dismissed his instincts as foolish. The human was still pathetically small and weak compared to a Corvan warrior. Size and strength would triumph as they always did. Vex charged forward with explosive speed, covering the distance between them in 2 massive strides. His plan was simple and brutal. Grab the human with his upper 2 arms, crush his ribs with his lower 2 arms, and end the fight before it truly began. The crowd would cheer, his father would be proud, and the humans would surrender their colonies without further resistance. Jake moved like lightning as the massive alien rushed toward him. Jake dropped low and stepped to his right, moving out of the direct line of Vex's charge. The Corvan's upper arms swept through empty air where the human had been standing a fraction of a second earlier. Vex tried to adjust his attack, reaching down with his lower arms to catch his opponent, but Jake was no longer there. The human had slipped inside the Corvan's guard, moving faster than seemed possible for such a small creature. Jake's right fist drove upward with surgical precision. striking the exact center of Vex's chest where his natural armor plating was thinnest. The impact created a sound like thunder echoing through the great hall. Vex's eyes went wide with shock as every molecule of air exploded from his lungs. The pain was unlike anything he had ever experienced, a burning agony that spread outward from the point of impact. He tried to breathe, tried to grab the human who had somehow hurt him, but his body would not respond. Jake did not pause or hesitate. As Vex doubled over from the chest strike, gasping for breath that would not come, the human's left hand shot upward like a striking snake. His fingers, held rigid as steel spears, found 3 specific points along the right side of the Corvin's thick neck. The effect was immediate and devastating. Vex's nervous system overloaded as Jake's fingers pressed against clusters of nerves that controlled the alien's 4 arms. A wave of numbness and paralysis spread down from his neck, and suddenly his massive limbs became dead weight hanging uselessly from his shoulders. The watching Corvins gasped in shock and disbelief. Their champion, their greatest young warrior, was being destroyed by a creature less than half his size. The human moved like water, flowing around Vex's desperate attempts to fight back, striking with the precision of a surgeon and the power of a sledgehammer. Jake completed his combination by sweeping his left leg behind both of Vex's knees while simultaneously driving his right elbow into the small of the alien's back. The leverage was perfect and physics did the rest. 8 feet and 400 pounds of Corvin warrior crashed face first into the metal floor with a sound that rang through the hall like a giant bell. The entire sequence had taken 4 seconds. Vex lay motionless on the floor, his 4 arms sprawled awkwardly around him like broken branches. He was conscious but completely unable to move, his nervous system still scrambled from Jake's precise strikes. His eyes darted frantically back and forth, the only part of his body he could still control. As he tried to understand what had happened to him, Jake straightened his sleeves and stepped back from his fallen opponent. His breathing was still, calm and regular, and there was not a single drop of sweat on his forehead. He looked like a man who had just finished a casual conversation, not someone who had just defeated a warrior twice his size in single combat. The silence in the great hall was absolute. Hundreds of Corvin warriors stared in stunned disbelief at the scene before them. Their greatest young champion lay helpless on the floor, paralyzed by a human they had dismissed as weak and pathetic just moments before. Captain Lisa Monroe felt her heart pounding in her chest as she stared at her bodyguard. She had known Jake was skilled, but she had never seen him fight before. The speed and precision of his attack had been almost inhuman, like watching a master craftsman work with perfect tools. Warlord Thrak rose slowly from his throne, his 4 arms trembling with either rage or fear. "Impossible," he growled, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "My son is the finest warrior of his generation. He has never been defeated in combat. How did this small human overcome him so easily?" Jake looked up at the massive alien leader with the same calm expression he had maintained throughout the fight. "Your son is very strong and very fast," he said respectfully. "But he expected me to fight like a Corvin. I fought like a human instead." "What is the difference?" Thrak demanded. "Corvins rely on size and strength," Jake explained. "Humans rely on precision and efficiency. Your son tried to overpower me. I tried to disable him. His approach required more time and energy than mine did." One of the other Corvin nobles stepped forward, his voice shaking with shock. "But you are so small. How do you possess such power?" Jake shrugged slightly. "I'm actually not very powerful by human standards. I'm just a bodyguard for diplomatic missions. There are human soldiers who are much stronger and faster than I am." This statement sent a wave of fear through the assembled aliens. If this weak human could defeat their champion so effortlessly, what could their actual warriors accomplish? The implications were terrifying. Dr. Amy Chun, who had been standing quietly beside Captain Monroe throughout the negotiations, stepped forward with her tablet computer. "Perhaps I can explain the science behind what you just witnessed," she offered. Thrak gestured for her to continue, his attention now completely focused on understanding how his worldview had been shattered so thoroughly. Humans evolved differently. Then Corvans, Amy began. We developed as persistence hunters and tool users over millions of years. Our muscle density, reaction time, and nervous system efficiency are all optimized for precision rather than raw power. She showed her tablet to the nearest Corvans, displaying anatomical diagrams and scientific data. What you see as weakness is actually evolutionary optimization. Humans can process visual information and react to threats faster than most species. In the galaxy, we also have an unusually detailed understanding of anatomy and pressure points. Vex managed to make a small groaning sound from the floor, indicating that sensation was slowly returning to his limbs. Jake immediately knelt beside the fallen alien and began massaging specific points along his neck and spine, helping to restore normal nerve function. You fought well, Jake told Vex quietly as the alien warrior slowly regained control of his arms. Your speed and strength are impressive. You just made the mistake of assuming I would fight the same way you do. Vex sat up slowly, flexing his forearms as feeling returned to them. He looked at Jake with a mixture of respect and fear. Your people, he said softly, are they all like you? Jake helped the alien to his feet and answered honestly. Some are much better than I am. I'm decent at hand-to-hand combat, but I'm mainly trained for protection and security work. Real human warriors train their entire lives for nothing but fighting. The revelation hit the Corvan court like a physical blow. They had been preparing to conquer a species they believed to be weak and helpless, but instead they had discovered an enemy far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The Great Hall remained silent for nearly a full minute after Jake's explanation. Every Corvan warrior present was trying to process what they had witnessed and what it meant for their understanding of the universe. The small, soft-looking human had not just defeated their champion, he had done it so easily that it looked almost casual. Commander Vex stood on unsteady legs, his forearms slowly regaining their full strength and coordination. He kept staring at Jake Sullivan as if seeing him for the first time. The human was still just as small as before, still looked just as harmless in his diplomatic clothing, but now Vex could see something else in the man's posture and movements. There was a controlled deadliness there that he had completely missed before the fight. I do not understand, Vex said quietly, his voice carrying across the silent hall. I have trained for combat since I was old enough to walk. I have defeated warriors from a dozen different species. How did you learn to fight like that? Jake adjusted his tie and picked up his suit jacket from where Captain Monroe was holding it. Basic training, mostly. Every human in our military learns hand-to-hand combat. It's considered essential knowledge, like reading or mathematics. Basic training? The question came from Warlord Thrak, who had descended from his throne and now loomed over the human delegation. You mean this skill is common among your people? Among our military, yes, Captain Lisa Monroe answered. Sergeant Sullivan is skilled, but he's not exceptional by human standards. He's a bodyguard and security specialist, not a frontline combat soldier. Dr. Amy Chen stepped forward with her tablet, clearly excited to share more scientific information. What you've seen demonstrates several key differences between human and Corvan evolution. Humans developed as cooperative hunters who relied on tools and tactics rather than individual strength. She pulled up a series of charts and graphs on her device. Our bone density is actually higher than most species, which allows us to generate more force per muscle pound. Our nervous systems process information faster, giving us superior reaction times. Most importantly, we've spent thousands of years developing martial arts and combat techniques that maximize efficiency. One of the Corvan nobles, an elderly warrior with scars covering most of his natural armor, spoke up in heavily accented English. You say this human is not exceptional. What would an exceptional human warrior be capable of? The question hung in the air like a threat. Lisa could see the fear in the alien's eyes as he asked it, and she realized that the entire balance of power in the negotiations had shifted completely. The Corvans were no longer looking at humans as prey to be conquered. They were starting to see them as predators to be avoided. Our elite special forces undergo years of training, Jake answered honestly. They learn to fight in zero gravity, underwater, in extreme temperatures, and against opponents of all sizes. They study anatomy, psychology, and tactics. A human special forces operator could probably take on 3 or 4 opponents like Commander Vex simultaneously. The Corvan warriors began murmuring among themselves in their own language. The tone was clearly one of alarm and concern. Several of them kept glancing nervously at Jake, as if expecting him to attack at any moment. Warlord Thrak held up one of his massive hands, and the murmuring stopped immediately. You claim that humans are more dangerous than we believed. But if this is true, why have you allowed the galaxy to see you as weak? Why did you not demonstrate your capabilities before now? Lisa stepped forward, recognizing an opportunity to explain human philosophy and strategy. Because we prefer cooperation to conquest, Warlord Thrak. We've found that when other species underestimate us, they're more likely to negotiate fairly rather than simply trying to intimidate us into submission. You deliberately appear weak to gain advantages in diplomacy? Thrak's voice carried a note of grudging respect. We appear exactly as we are, Lisa corrected. We're not naturally aggressive or warlike. We don't build our entire society around combat like the Corvans do. But when we're threatened, we can be far more dangerous than our appearance suggests. Jake nodded in agreement. Most humans would prefer to never fight at all. But when fighting becomes necessary, we've learned to be very good at it. Commander Vex, who had been listening quietly while continuing to flex his gradually recovering arms, suddenly spoke up. The galaxy believes humans are weak because you let them believe it. You've been hiding your true strength this entire time. Not hiding, Amy corrected. Simply not advertising. There's a difference between concealing abilities and not bragging about them. Thrak began pacing back and forth in front of his throne, his forearms clasped behind his back in a gesture that seemed almost human. This changes everything. The Corvan Empire has been planning to expand into human territory because we believed you could not defend it effectively. And now? Lisa asked. Now I realize that attacking human colonies would likely result in the destruction of any Corvan forces foolish enough to attempt it, Thrak admitted. If your average soldiers are as capable as this one, and your elite forces are even more dangerous, then we have seriously misjudged the military situation. One of the younger Corvan warriors stepped forward, his voice shaking with a mixture of excitement and fear. Warlord, if the humans are this dangerous, should we not strike first before they grow even stronger? The hall fell silent again, and Lisa felt her heart skip a beat. This was exactly the kind of thinking that could turn a peaceful negotiation into a declaration of war. She opened her mouth to speak, but Jake beat her to it. That would be a mistake, the human said quietly. You've seen what one human can do against your best warrior. Imagine what 1,000,000 humans could do if you gave them a reason to fight. The threat was delivered in the same calm, conversational tone that Jake had used throughout the encounter, but its impact was immediate and powerful. The Corvans looked at each other with growing alarm as they considered the implications. Thrak stared at Jake for a long moment, then asked, "How many humans serve in your military forces?" "Classified information," Lisa answered smoothly. "But I can tell you that every human colony world has its own defense forces, and our colonial federation maintains a substantial fleet for system security. And they are all trained like him?" Vex gestured toward Jake with 2 of his arms. "Better," Jake said simply. "I'm primarily a security specialist. Our actual combat troops train much harder and longer than I do." The elderly Corvan noble who had spoken earlier stepped closer to the human delegation. "You speak of your soldiers as if they were machines built for war. But you also say humans prefer peace. How do you reconcile this contradiction?" Amy smiled and pulled up another display on her tablet. "It's not a contradiction at all. Humans have a saying, if you want peace, prepare for war. We train our soldiers to be as effective as possible, specifically so that we don't have to use them very often. A warrior culture that values peace above conquest?" The noble sounded confused by the concept. A survival culture that values continuation above domination, Lisa corrected. We learned long ago that the best way to avoid being destroyed is to make sure that anyone who might want to destroy us understands the cost of trying. Thrak stopped pacing and turned to face the humans directly. You are saying that human military doctrine is based on deterrence rather than aggression. Exactly, Lisa confirmed. We want potential enemies to look at us and decide that fighting humans would be too expensive and too risky to be worthwhile. And if deterrence fails? Vex asked. Jake's answer was simple and chilling. Then we make sure it only fails once. The implication was clear, and the Korvans understood it perfectly. Humanity might prefer peace, but they were prepared for war, in ways that the galaxy had never suspected. The small, seemingly fragile species had been allowing others to underestimate them while quietly building one of the most effective military forces anyone had ever encountered. Warlord Thrak returned to his throne and sat down heavily, all four of his arms resting on the metal armrests. I need to reconsider our entire strategic position. The Korvan Empire cannot afford to make an enemy of a species like yours. You don't have to be our enemy at all, Lisa said hopefully. That's why we're here. We want to find a way for both our peoples to coexist peacefully and profitably. After what I have seen today, Thrak replied, I believe that may be possible. But first, I must ask you something directly, Captain Monroe. If the Korvan Empire were to attack human colonies, what would be the response? Lisa looked at Jake, who nodded slightly, then answered with complete honesty, total war. Every human military unit in the galaxy would be mobilized. We would not stop fighting until either the Korvan Empire was destroyed or humanity was extinct. The finality in her voice left no room for doubt. Thrak closed his eyes and sat in silence for several minutes while his warriors waited nervously for his decision. When Warlord Thrak finally opened his eyes and spoke again, his entire demeanor had changed. The arrogant contempt that had filled his voice earlier was gone, replaced by the careful respect of one apex predator acknowledging another. Captain Monroe, he said formally, the Korvan Empire wishes to discuss terms for a mutual defense and trade agreement with the Human Colonial Federation. The transformation in the Great Hall was immediate and dramatic. Warriors who had been laughing at the humans just an hour earlier now watched them with wary respect. The whispered conversations in the Korvan language carried tones of concern and calculation rather than mockery. Lisa felt a wave of relief wash over her, but she was careful not to let it show on her face. We would be honored to negotiate such an agreement, Warlord Thrak. I believe both our peoples have much to offer each other. Indeed, Thrak agreed. The Korvan Empire has always valued strength and efficiency. We now see that humanity possesses both qualities in abundance, despite appearances that suggested otherwise. Commander Vex, who had remained quiet since his defeat, stepped forward and addressed Jake directly. Human warrior, would you be willing to teach some of our fighters your techniques? We have much to learn about combat efficiency. Jake considered the request carefully. That would depend on what you plan to do with the knowledge. Human combat techniques are designed for defense and deterrence, not conquest. After today's demonstration, Vex replied, I think the Korvan military would benefit greatly from learning defensive strategies. We have focused too heavily on offensive capabilities. Dr. Amy Chen moved closer to the discussion, her tablet still displaying various charts and graphs. There could be significant benefits to military cooperation between our species. Korvan. Natural armor and strength combined with human tactics and precision could create very effective defensive forces. Thrak nodded thoughtfully. An interesting possibility. But first we must establish the basic framework for peaceful relations. Captain Monroe, what are your terms for the proposed treaty? Lisa pulled out a datapad containing the preliminary agreement that human diplomats had drafted before the mission. We propose mutual recognition of territorial boundaries, establishment of trade routes between our systems, and a non-aggression pact with provisions for joint defense against external threats. External threats? One of the Korvan nobles asked. You speak as if there are enemies that concern both our peoples. The galaxy is a dangerous place, Lisa explained. There are several aggressive species that have been expanding their territories through conquest. The Vorthen Hive, the Crimson Brotherhood, the Machine Collective, any of them would pose a serious threat to isolated systems. Thrak leaned forward with interest. You suggest that Corvins and humans working together could defend against these threats more effectively than either species acting alone? Absolutely, Jake interjected. Corvin warriors are incredibly strong and resilient. Human tactics and technology could multiply that effectiveness significantly. Together, we'd be far stronger than the sum of our parts. The elderly Corvan noble, who had spoken earlier, stepped closer to the throne. Warlord, this could solve several of our strategic problems. The Machine Collective has been probing our outer systems for months. A human alliance might be exactly what we need to discourage their expansion. What would such an alliance require of the Corvan Empire? Thrak asked. Lisa consulted her datapad. Primarily, we would need guarantees that Corvan forces would not attack human colonies or shipping. In return, we would provide the same guarantees regarding Corvan territory. We would also establish joint patrol routes in border systems and share intelligence about common threats. And trade agreements? Human colonies produce advanced electronics, medical supplies, and agricultural products. We understand that Corvan systems are rich in rare metals and energy crystals. There could be significant profit for both sides. Thrake was quiet for several minutes, clearly considering all the implications. Finally, he spoke. The terms seem reasonable in principle. But I must ask directly, if we sign such a treaty, what guarantee do we have that humans will honor it? Jake answered before Lisa could speak. The same guarantee you have that we won't simply exterminate you if you break it. Mutual assured destruction is a powerful motivator for keeping agreements. The blunt honesty of the statement seemed to resonate with the Corvan mindset. Several warriors nodded approvingly, recognizing the logic of the position. A fair point. Thrak acknowledged. Very well. We will negotiate this treaty in good faith, with full understanding of what both sides bring to the agreement. Over the next several hours, the details of the treaty were hammered out. The Corvins proved to be shrewd negotiators once they accepted humans as equals, but the discussions remained civil and productive. The final agreement included provisions for joint military exercises, technology-sharing programs, and the establishment of embassy stations in both human and Corvan space. As the formal negotiations concluded, Commander Vex approached Jake privately. I have been thinking about our fight, he said quietly. You defeated me so easily, but you also helped me recover afterward. Why did you show such mercy to a defeated enemy? Jake smiled slightly. Because you weren't really my enemy. You were just someone who had wrong information about humans. Once you learned the truth, there was no reason for us to be hostile to each other. This is another human concept I do not fully understand, Vex admitted. Among Corvans, defeated enemies are often killed or permanently shamed. Among humans, defeated enemies often become valuable allies, Jake explained. Some of our strongest friendships have started with conflicts that ended in mutual respect. Vex considered this for a moment. Would you truly be willing to teach Corvan warriors your fighting techniques? If they're used for defense and peacekeeping, yes, Jake replied. Violence should always be a last resort, but when it becomes necessary, it should be decisive and efficient. I would like to learn this philosophy as well as the techniques. Vex said, perhaps there is wisdom in the human approach to warfare. Meanwhile, Captain Monroe was finalizing the last details of the treaty with Warlord Thrak. There is one more thing I need to address, she said. Word of today's events will spread throughout both our civilizations. How do we handle the publicity? Thrak considered the question. Among Corvins, there is no shame in acknowledging a superior opponent. We will tell our people that humans are far more formidable than previously believed, and that alliance is preferable to conflict. And we'll tell our people that the Corvan Empire has chosen cooperation over conquest, Lisa replied. Both sides can present this as a victory for reasonable diplomacy. Dr. Amy Chen, who had been documenting the entire proceedings, looked up from her tablet. This could actually serve as a model for human relations with other species. Controlled demonstrations of capability might be more effective than lengthy diplomatic negotiations in some cases. Let's hope it doesn't come to that too often, Lisa said. But it's good to know that the option exists if needed. As the human delegation prepared to depart, Thrak made one final statement that would be remembered by both species for generations to come. Today, the Corvan Empire learned that strength comes in many forms and that wisdom lies in recognizing it wherever it appears. We look forward to a long and profitable alliance with humanity. The return journey to human space was much more comfortable than the trip to the Corvan station had been. Instead of traveling in a small diplomatic transport, the humans were given passage aboard a Corvan cruiser as honored guests. The alien crew treated them with a respect that bordered on reverence, particularly when it came to Jake. "You know," Lisa said as they watched the stars stream by through the cruiser's observation deck, "I never asked you where you learned to fight like that." Jake shrugged. "Basic Marine training, like I told them, plus some specialized courses in personal protection and close-quarters combat. Nothing too exotic." "That was not basic anything," Lisa protested. "You moved like you had been training your entire life." "In a way, I have been," Jake admitted. "Humans are natural fighters, Captain. We just usually choose not to be." Dr. Amy Chen joined them at the observation window. "I've been analyzing the diplomatic implications of what happened back there. This could fundamentally change how other species perceive humanity." "Is that good or bad?" Lisa asked. "Probably both," Amy replied. "Respect based on fear is useful in the short term, but it can lead to problems if not managed carefully. We'll need to be very thoughtful about how we use this new reputation." Jake nodded in agreement. "The goal should be to never have to demonstrate our capabilities again. If we do this right, the story of what happened today will be enough to prevent future conflicts." As their ship approached human space, Lisa began composing her report to Colonial Command. The mission had succeeded beyond her wildest expectations, but she knew that the real work was just beginning. Building a lasting peace between two very different species would require careful attention and ongoing effort from both sides. The final entry in her mission. Log read, "The Corvan Empire will no longer be a threat to human colonies. They have learned that underestimating humanity is a dangerous mistake. Our reputation for weakness served its purpose.